Welcome to the Real Money Pathway, where I share my journey from financial collapse to lasting wealth. I'm David Kim, and I'll guide you through practical strategies that transform my finances and can transform yours too. Let's build your pathway to financial freedom.
The content of this podcast is provided for general information purposes only and do not constitute financial advice. Listeners should not act upon the content or information here without first seeking appropriate advice from a financial professional.
Welcome back to The Real Money Pathway. I'm David Kim, author of The Real Money Guide, the Missing Manual for Financial Recovery. Through our first 9 episodes, we've explored my entire journey from financial collapse to rebuilding, covering everything from understanding financial trauma, managing cash flow, rebuilding your credit, and developing the small, consistent habits that eventually create significant impact. Today, we're addressing a dimension of financial recovery that proves just as important as practical strategies, but receives far less attention. Effective financial communication during crisis periods, because financial challenges rarely affect just numbers on the spreadsheet or yourself. They impact relationships, families, and communities in deeply personal ways. I still remember one of the most difficult conversations of my life, sitting down with my children, then 7 and 5 years old, after the failure of my restaurant and having to abandon our home and move states, changing schools, and dramatically altering our lifestyle following that failure. The confusion in their eyes and even in their minds, trying to understand what's happening, remains still one of the most painful memories of my financial collapse. My daughter, just over 7 at the time, looked at me directly and asked, are we poor now? It was a simple question that just carried some incredible emotional weight. Our entire understanding of our family's place in the world was just shifting beneath our feet, crumbling. How I responded to those questions, what I shared, what I protected them from, how I balanced honesty with appropriate reassurance, that shaped their relationship with money for years to come. It wasn't just a conversation about immediate circumstances, but a defining moment in their financial education and emotional security. Today's episode explores how to navigate these critical financial conversations, at least how I have and what I've learned, not just with children, but your partners during your most challenging periods. Effective financial communication creates a strong foundation for both practical solutions and emotional resilience when facing even the most difficult money challenges. Financial communication challenges intensify dramatically during crisis periods, creating barriers that frequently prevent effective discussion precisely when open dialogue becomes so much more crucial. Understanding these barriers provides essential foundations for developing communication approaches that work despite emotional and practical complexities. My own financial collapse created numerous communication obstacles that initially prevented productive money conversations with those most affected by my situation. These challenges emerged not from deliberate avoidance, but from powerful psychological dynamics that financial crisis often triggers. I felt shame, and it created perhaps the most significant communication barrier during my financial collapse. After building an identity partly based on financial success, acknowledging bankruptcy and its implications generated profound embarrassment that made even basic money decisions incredibly difficult. This shame manifested physically, causing me to literally lower my voice when discussing financial topics, avoiding eye contact during those money conversations, and physically withdrawing when financial subjects arose. It also triggered protective instincts, particularly towards my children. It created additional communication complications. My desire to shield them from financial stress and preserve their sense of security often conflicted with their need for honest explanation about changing circumstances. This tension between that protection and transparency, it created this significant internal conflict in me about what information I should share, and if I do, how I would present it appropriately. Another trigger was the fear of judgment. This affected financial conversations with nearly everyone in my life. Concerns about how others might view my financial mistakes, particularly friends, colleagues, and extended family who had previously seen me as financially successful. It created a powerful resistance towards open discussion. Even conversations with those offering support, it carried this anxiety in me about potential disappointment or diminished respect following financial disclosure. And finally, technical complexity created further communication challenges when discussing financial realities with those having limited financial knowledge. My bankruptcy involved complicated legal processes, credit implications, and financial restructuring that proved difficult to explain clearly to family members without creating additional confusion or unnecessary anxiety. So, all these combined barriers. Initially, it created a significant communication avoidance for me during my early financial crisis. Rather than discussing circumstances openly, I frequently provided minimal information about financial changes until it was absolutely necessary. It created sudden revelations rather than a gradual understanding. I also tended to avoid financial discussions entirely when possible, creating communication gaps that family members often filled with assumptions, actually worse than reality. I tended to respond defensively when asked financial questions, unintentionally discouraging further conversations through emotional reactions. This communication avoidance created several significant negative consequences beyond just information gaps. It created relationship strain as it emerged with family members that sensed problems without knowing the details and without understanding the nature. Of course, my wife and children at the time recognized that there was something wrong despite limited discussion. And that created anxiety that the honest, open communication probably could have alleviated. I ended up missing support opportunities when communication barriers prevented me from accessing potential help that others could have provided. Several friends later shared that they would have offered practical support had they understood more clearly the temporary financial challenges that we were undergoing. Then psychological isolation intensified as communication avoidance created a sense of facing financial challenges all alone, despite being surrounded by family and friends. This isolation really increased my emotional burden during already difficult circumstances. So, the turning point in my financial communication came through this communication crisis. It was this specific incident that demonstrated to me the unsustainability of continued avoidance. This for me occurred when my daughter overheard a very tense phone conversation I was having with a creditor. And after the call, she had asked, are we going to lose everything? What is bankruptcy? And her fear was based on just what she had heard in the context. And it revealed that my communication avoidance was actually creating unnecessary and additional anxiety rather than providing protection. This specific moment triggered a fundamental shift in my approach to financial communication, especially during crisis. Rather than viewing limited disclosure as protection, I began recognizing that appropriate, transparent discussion often provides greater emotional security than silence that leaves imagination filling information gaps with often worst case scenarios. For those that are currently experiencing similar communication challenges during financial distress, several perspective principles from my experience created this important foundation for improved approaches. First, let's recognize that communication avoidance typically increases rather than decreases overall stress during financial crisis. While discussions may create temporary discomfort, the anxiety generated through uncertainty and imagination, it often exceeds the emotional impact of appropriate, transparent conversations. Then you have to understand that effective financial communication represents skill development rather than ability. Just as financial management requires learning specific approaches, productive money conversations during crisis involve techniques that improve through practice rather than depending on just your natural communication style. Then you have to acknowledge that different relationships require different and distinct communication approaches during these financial challenges. The appropriate transparency, level of detail, and emotional context for discussing financial crisis with partners differs significantly from conversations with children or extended family or even professional contacts. We must accept that perfect financial communication just doesn't exist, particularly during crisis periods. Even the most thoughtful approaches involve occasional missteps, communication gaps, or emotional reactions. A focus on improvement rather than an expectation of perfection creates realistic frameworks for developing more effective discussion patterns, despite all these challenges. These foundational perspectives create essential starting points for implementing specific financial communication approaches tailored to different relationship contexts, from your partners to your children. With these principles established, practical strategies for various conversation types can address distinct communication needs while managing the overall emotional complexity these financial crises creates. So let's address talking to partners about financial challenges. Partner financial conversations during crisis periods carry particular importance and complexity, as these relationships typically involve both practical interdependence and deep emotional connection. Navigating these discussions effectively require balancing complete transparency with appropriate delivery that strengthens rather than damages relationship bonds during already very stressful circumstances. My experience with partner financial communication spans two very distinct relationships through different financial phases. My first marriage suffered significantly through financial collapse, partly due to ineffective communication patterns from my part that undermined the mutual support during crisis. By contrast, my relationship with Lacey began with financial transparency that created strong foundation for effective money discussions throughout rebuilding and beyond. These contrasting experiences revealed several crucial principles, again, that I've seen for effective partner financial communications during normal and challenging periods. My financial communication, or even lack of, during my first marriage deterioration involved significant information gaps that prevented effective joint problem solving. As my consulting income became increasingly unpredictable and financial challenges intensified, I often provided only a partial update that minimized the situation's severity while managing details independently. The limited transparency created several significant problems. It prevented a collaborative solution development by restricting access to complete information necessary for like a joint decision making process. It created a erosion of trust when partial disclosures eventually revealed as incomplete when circumstances changed or information was discovered. It generated relationship tension through perceived exclusion from more important financial realities affecting both of us as partners. And it established a problematic precedence where financial challenges became individual rather than shared as relationship experiences. In deep contrast, my relationship with Lacey began with a total, complete financial disclosure that I've talked about during our third date. I shared my entire bankruptcy history, my rebuilding status, ongoing financial recovery without any type of minimization or omission. I wanted to be totally transparent. Know what you're signing up for, is what I said. This early transparency, although funny at the time when we look back, it established this crucial foundation for subsequent financial discussions throughout various circumstances. The benefits of this complete transparency approach extended far beyond just that information sharing. It created this authentic connection based on genuine understanding rather than managed impressions or selective disclosure. It established financial discussion precedent that made subsequent money conversations pretty natural and extensions of this established communication pattern that we had. It developed shared vocabulary for discussing financial realities that for us facilitated efficient communication during even later points. And it demonstrated a mutual respect through confidence in each of our capacity to handle that complete financial information, regardless of the circumstance, in good or bad. For those navigating partner financial discussions during crisis, I've seen a few approaches that really support effective transparency while managing that emotional complexity. First, schedule dedicated financial conversations rather than incorporating significant money discussions into other activities. These designated times create appropriate mental preparation while preventing financial topics from continuously dominating other relationship interactions. Lacey and I created a weekly money update, and it provides a structured opportunity for comprehensive financial updates while maintaining boundaries that prevent financial stress from just permeating through our entire relationship. We create appropriate physical environments supporting productive financial dialogue, location, timing, setting significant impact conversation quality, particularly during those emotionally charged financial discussions. My most effective partner financial conversations occurred Sunday mornings at our kitchen table with phones on silent and potential interruptions minimized. This consistent setting created psychological preparation for focused financial discussion without distraction. We use written information to supplement our verbal communication during these complex financial situations. We have visual documentation, such as Excel spreadsheets, that facilitate our understanding while reducing potential misinterpretation of detailed financial information. We keep it in a shared folder that we can both access at any time. Our shared financial spreadsheet shows key metrics, challenges, progress indicators, all providing consistent reference points that reduce communication gaps while ensuring our mutual understanding of our financial reality. Another aspect is to balance emotional and practical dimensions. Financial challenges create both practical problems requiring solutions, but also emotional responses needing acknowledgement. Effective partner communication addresses both dimensions rather than focusing exclusively on just practical details or just on emotional processing. My early marriage financial discussions frequently emphasized practical aspects while minimizing emotional components. This imbalanced approach created apparent efficiency, but prevented processing the relationship impact of financial changes beyond their practical implications. More effective partner conversations developed with Lacey through deliberate attention to both dimensions. Explicit emotional check ins before detailed financial discussion created space for sharing feelings about our situation before addressing specific numbers or decisions. This sequencing prevents emotional responses from being displaced onto practical details while ensuring both dimensions receive that appropriate attention. Acknowledgement of different emotional responses to identical financial circumstances prevented judgment when partners experience different reactions to shared situations. Recognizing that financial events carry unique emotional significance based on each person's history and temperament created acceptance of diverse responses without requiring emotional uniformity. Distinction between the emotion sharing and decision making maintain appropriate boundaries while honoring both components. By clearly separating how we feel about something versus what we'll do about this. Our conversations created space for authentic expression without confusing it with practical decision making. And finally, we developed a shared decision framework before crisis. Perhaps the most valuable aspect of effective partner financial communication involves establishing shared decision processes before encountering those specific challenging circumstances. These predetermined frameworks create efficient resolution paths when emotional intensity might otherwise complicate that decision making. My first marriage suffered from an absence of decision frameworks that required creating processes simultaneously with addressing specific financial problems. This dual challenge, establishing how decisions would be made while making the actual decision, it created this inefficiency and conflict during already very stressful situations. In contrast, my early relationship discussions with Lacey established very clear decision parameters that proved invaluable during subsequent financial situations. We set predetermined financial authority thresholds that establish clear expectations for individual versus joint decisions. We set numbers that changed throughout our relationships depending on our total income, but our initial agreement was that individual purchases below $200 required no consultation with each other. Those between 200 to 1,000 warranted some sort of notification. And of course, those exceeding 1,000 necessitated a mutual agreement, creating an efficient decision process without continuous negotiation of whose authority or what boundaries existed. We created explicit emergency decision protocols that determined how crisis financial decisions would be handled when normal consultation might prove impossible. Our established parameters for individual action during urgent situations created appropriate autonomy while maintaining accountability through post decision communications. And another interesting point was designating final authority areas that acknowledged particular expertise and history within different financial domains. Our agreement regarding Lacey's final authority in emergency fund decisions and my final authority in investment approaches prevented decision paralysis through clear resolution responsibility within respective areas. Rather than simultaneously determining how and what to decide during crisis moments, these established approaches created efficient resolution paths when clear thinking might otherwise be challenging. For those developing partner financial communications during challenging or even not challenging periods, several principles that helped me can help you improve your outcomes. First, start with a shared financial values exploration before addressing specific practical details. Understanding broader money perspectives and priorities creates context for discussing particular situations within large relationship financial frameworks. My early conversations with Lacey exploring our money histories, financial values, and long term priorities established essential context that subsequently informed specific decision approaches during various circumstances. Implement regular financial communication, regardless of current challenges, rather than restricting money discussions to problem situations. Consistent communication during normal circumstances creates a foundation for a very effective dialogue when challenges actually emerge. Our financial check ins continued through both challenging and stable periods, even through today, maintaining communication muscle that functioned effectively when difficult circumstances required additional discussion capacity. And acknowledge and utilize different communication styles when developing financial discussion approaches. Tailoring the conversation to accommodate diverse processing creates more effective dialogue than expecting a uniform communication approach. By implementing transparent, balanced, and structured financial communication, partners create capacity for navigating even severe financial challenges while maintaining relationship health during circumstances that often damage connections when discussed ineffectively. This communication foundation doesn't prevent financial difficulties, but it creates resilience and understanding for addressing them collaboratively rather than experiencing them as relationship threats. Next, let's talk about discussing financial changes and finances in general with children. Financial discussions with children during challenging periods involve unique complexity, requiring age appropriate transparency that provides security without creating unnecessary anxiety. These conversations significantly impact not just immediate understanding, but long term money relationships that will persist far beyond your current circumstances. My experience discussing financial challenges with my children revealed both the consequences of delayed communication and the benefits of appropriate transparency adjusted for developmental understanding. These contrasting outcomes provided valuable insight about effective approaches for different ages, situations, and communication objectives. The financial conversation with my children described in our introduction, explaining post business failure, housing and lifestyle changes, move across state lines, came later than ideal after significant communication avoidance. This delayed disclosure created several problems that earlier appropriate transparency might have prevented. Leading up to bankruptcy, years later, my children had already sensed tension, overheard partial conversations, and noticed behavioral changes without understanding their cause. This information gap created anxiety, potentially worse than appropriate explanation would have generated. The necessary changes came as sudden announcements rather than gradual adjustment opportunities. Without preparation time, my children faced immediate processing of significant transition without emotional runway that earlier discussions might have provided. The compressed timeline prevented an opportunity for adjustment. Earlier disclosure could have involved them in certain aspects, creating agency rather than experiencing changes as entirely imposed circumstances. These consequences highlighted the importance of timely financial communication, even with your children, during challenging periods. While your parental protection instincts often encourage discussion postponement, appropriate early transparency typically provides greater security than silence that leaves their imagination creating explanations for obviously changing circumstances. My subsequent financial discussions with my children during my rebuilding phase employed some different principles than I had practiced early on. I adopted more age appropriate transparency and discussions that provided security without unnecessary detail. Children require financial information matching their development capacity rather than adult level disclosure or complete protection. My improved approach involved tailoring financial discussions and even education each child's specific understanding level. For both children, explanations emphasize security maintenance within changing circumstances rather than focusing on financial limitations alone. Our discussions balanced honest acknowledgement of necessary adjustments with clear identification of continuing stability elements, maintained relationships, continuing love, and core needs fulfillment despite circumstantial changes. And finally, appropriate agency created participation rather than victimhood. Children experiencing financial challenges benefit from age appropriate participation in certain adjustment aspects rather than perceiving themselves as powerless circumstance recipients. Choice opportunities within necessary changes provided limited but meaningful control. When moving to smaller housing became necessary, involving my children in certain aspects of room arrangement, possession selection, and space personalization created agency within this unavoidable transition. Contribution recognition within family adjustment efforts acknowledged their role in collective adaptation, explicitly appreciating their flexibility, cooperation, and understanding validated their active participation rather than casting them as passive impact recipients. Future improvement discussions included their perspective in planning gradual recovery. Age appropriate conversations and activities about financial goals, rebuilding approaches, and eventual improvement created hope through participation rather than presenting current circumstances as permanent conditions. For parents currently navigating financial discussions with children, whether during challenging or non challenging periods, several specific approaches, from my experience, can create improved outcomes. Distinguish between harmful secrets and appropriate privacy when determining disclosure boundaries. While children deserve honest explanations of changes affecting their lives directly, they don't require complete adult financial details that might create unnecessary anxiety without contributing to useful understanding. My children needed to know we were moving to a different state, to less expensive housing, changing vehicles, all because our financial situation had changed significantly. They didn't need specific details about business failure, loss of employment, exact income, and debt. All that would have just added complexity without enhancing their understanding. You have to recognize that financial discussions represent ongoing conversations rather than one time explanations. Effective communication, especially with children, typically involve initial information followed by multiple follow up conversations addressing their questions, processing their emotions, and providing additional details as circumstances evolve. And finally, consult age appropriate resources supporting financial discussions with children. Various books, activities, and professional guidance exist for different developmental stages, providing structured approaches, enhancing parent communication effectiveness during challenging conversations. The most important insight from my experience discussing finances with children involves recognizing that the appropriate transparency typically creates greater security than protection through withholding information. While adult financial details often prove unnecessary or even harmful, age appropriate explanation of circumstances directly affecting children's lives generally reduces anxiety rather than creating it when presented with security emphasis, emotional validation, and continued stability assurance. These thoughtful discussions not only support immediate circumstances, but establishes financial communication patterns potentially benefiting children throughout their lives. By demonstrating appropriate transparency, emotional safety, collaborative problem solving during challenging periods, parents provide valuable financial relationship modeling extending far beyond current situation management. Today's episode focused on financial communication during crisis periods, and our practical takeaway provides a starting point for developing your own effective discussion approaches across different relationships. I'd like to introduce two tools today: a couples money values assessment and a age appropriate financial education generator. Both tools are available on realmoneypathway.com and therealmoneyguide.com. These interactive resources helps prepare for different types of financial discussions by providing a structured guidance tailored to those age appropriate discussions. The couple's money value assessment begins with a conversation assessment and an understanding assessment of how each person views money. Rather than applying generic approaches, this evaluation creates a focused preparation and matching for your specific particular situation of how you understand money from your point of view as well as your partner's point of view. The Financial Education Activity Generator creates age-appropriate financial education and conversation points depending on the age. The tool allows you to pick age groups, and it develops activities and conversation generators that are custom to those age groups. For those preparing important financial conversations this week or upcoming in the future, I recommend focusing on 2 specific actions. First, identify your highest priority financial discussion, whether it's with your partner or your children or extended family, and schedule appropriate preparation time before this conversation occurs. Rather than approaching significant financial communication spontaneously, deliberate preparation dramatically improves outcomes through focused development of effective discussions tailored to your specific situation. Second, create basic written notes for this important conversation, including your primary message, your key points, potential questions, and desired outcomes. This simple documentation clarifies your communication objectives while providing valuable reference during potentially emotional discussions when spontaneous communication might prove less effective than thoughtfully prepared approaches. Effective financial communication represents a learned skill rather than natural ability, particularly during challenging periods when emotions and circumstances create additional complexity. Through deliberate preparation and thoughtful implementation, you can develop discussion approaches that support both practical solutions and relationship health despite difficult financial situations. Today, we've explored effective financial communication approaches during crisis periods, from understanding common discussion barriers to developing specific strategies for partners or children. These balanced communication approaches support both practical financial solutions and relationship health during challenging circumstances that might otherwise damage important connections through ineffective discussion patterns. If there's one message that I hope you take from this episode, it's that effective financial communication becomes particularly important precisely when it feels most difficult. The conversations we're tempted to avoid during challenging periods often prove most crucial for both practical resolution and emotional support, requiring deliberate approaches rather than avoidance or unstructured disclosure during those sensitive situations. In our next episode, Finding Financial Mentors, we'll explore another crucial aspect of financial recovery, identifying and working with guides who've successfully navigated similar challenges. I'll share how Casey's mentorship transformed my recovery journey, providing both practical guidance and emotional support when I needed it the most. We'll discuss why financial mentorship matters, particularly during recovery periods, approaches for identifying potential mentors aligned with specific needs, strategies for building productive mentoring relationships that benefit both participants, learning effectively from multiple mentoring sources beyond individual relationships, and evolving mentorships appropriately through different financial phases, from crisis through stability towards growth. As you move through the coming week, I encourage you to implement at least one improved financial communication approach based on the concepts we've discussed today. Whether you're preparing more effectively for a partner discussion or you're developing age-appropriate conversations with your children. Even modest communication improvements create significant benefits during challenging financial periods. I'd love to hear about your financial communication experiences during challenging times. If you're comfortable sharing, please visit realmoneypathway.com and let me know what discussion approaches have proven most effective in your situation. Your insights might help others navigating similar conversations while shaping future episodes addressing specific communication questions. Thank you for joining me as we continue building practical approaches to financial recovery. Effective financial communication supports both relationship health and practical solutions during challenging periods that benefit significantly from thoughtful discussion approaches. Until next time, I'm David Kim, and remember, it's not just about money, it's about building your real money pathway to freedom. Thanks for joining me on the Real Money Pathway podcast. I'm David Kim, reminding you that financial success isn't about perfection, it's about progress. So subscribe now for more strategies, and remember, your journey to lasting wealth starts with the very next decision you make.